Welcome back to another video. For this tutorial, we're just going to paint a simple landscape using 3 colors. I'm trying out a new palette today. This one is from Jackson's Art Supply. It's a 7-inch diameter ceramic palette with 5 wells. You can see it's quite large. It has plenty of space for mixing, and something I love about this palette is you can set your brush right on top. There's these little dips in the side for holding your brush. My 3 colors for this project are Daniel Smith Burnt Sienna, Ultramarine Blue, and Hansa Yellow Light. So it's a 3 set of primaries. Burnt Sienna isn't necessarily a primary red, but it's a reddish brown, so it will serve as our red primary. My paper today is Fabriano Artistico 140 pound cold pressed cotton paper. It's a 5x7 inch block. A block of paper just means that the paper is glued down on the sides, except for one little section where you can remove it. That keeps it from warping and buckling when you apply lots of water. And I'll be using my silver black velvet size 8 round brush. Make sure you have a water jar and some paper towel for blotting. Now I'm going to try to do this project without any sketching, so we're just going to go in with paint right away. It'll be helpful to start from the background and move towards the foreground. In my reference photo, which I'll include a link in the description below so you guys can paint along with me, you can see that the sky behind the mountains is a beautiful yellow color. There's some dark clouds above it, and there's a brilliant sun right in the middle. And then you have these dark bluish mountains and some water in the foreground, and it fades off into darkness off on the side. You might be wondering, how do we get those darks without actually having any black paint? And we can use our combination of ultramarine and burnt sienna to create black. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and start with the sky. So for the sky, start with water on your brush. Remove any excess on the side of your jar, and then take your clean water and apply it all across the top of the sky. You can even allow it to just go almost halfway down or a third of the way down the paper. Make sure you have a nice glossy surface, but no puddles. If there are puddles that form, scoop those out with your brush and just use a nice gentle side-to-side motion so that the water is evenly dispersed across the surface. Next, take some of your yellow paint. Swirl it in your palette a little bit so it's not so pure yellow, and then go into the sky with your yellow color, using it to surround this imaginary sun. You can even make a circular shape with your brush. Just carefully outline that sun shape, and make sure your yellow is not too dark. Not at this stage anyway. We want to work our way gradually towards a darker color with those clouds. And I'm just blotting with the paintbrush, already suggesting some clouds in the sky. In the reference photo, it's a little lighter in value up here towards the top. So I'm removing some paint with my water and swiping on the paper towel so that it's a lighter value through this area of the sky. Now don't let it dry out completely. We're going to take a tiny little bit of burnt sienna now and swirl it in with that yellow and begin to suggest some clouds in the sky. Think of it as a first layer. I know if you're looking at the reference photo, you're thinking, well, those clouds are actually dark gray, but this is just the start. And you can see it almost looks a little bit orangey, that burnt sienna combined with the yellow. And that's because burnt sienna is so reddish. So it's serving as our red tone to create this orange effect in the sky. Painting it up to the corners here. While your paper is still wet, you can get away with quite a bit of scrubbing. You can push and pull the paint, move it around. Just be careful that you don't have any extra water in your brush, or it will displace the paint underneath and cause blooms, or backwash is another word for it. And then I'm going to take a little bit more and paint some tiny little clouds surrounding that sun, rinsing so that it's slightly lighter towards the horizon line. Now we're going to take some of our blue, ultramarine blue, and swirl it again on the palette to test it out, see how dark it is. And this is where we're going to combine it with the burnt sienna to create a bluish gray. If you want it to be even more blue, use more ultramarine. If you want it to be more neutralized, mix in more burnt sienna. And here we're going to paint a dark cloud up in the corner. This is still wet on wet. Now be careful if you've ended up working a little too slow and your paint has begun to dry, you'll want to wait until it's completely dry before doing this next step with the clouds, because otherwise you will accidentally lift the paint up. Now I'm applying some more burnt sienna over the top of that, and I'm beginning to sense that my paper is drying a little too much too. So I'm going to let that dry before I mess with it any further. Sometimes the hardest part is just leaving it alone, right? Now, while that's drying, you can work elsewhere in the painting. We can begin a first layer of blue tone in the water and in the mountains. So I'm taking clean water once again, swiping it across the middle of the paper, just like we did with the sky, spreading it out in a smooth and even side-to-side brush stroke. You can bring it right up to that sky. Try not to have any excess water, especially if this is still drying, or it will push aside that paint. And we're going to take a little bit of that ultramarine burnt sienna mixture, which is this neutral gray. Mix up some more if you want. And if you want it to be a little more blue, make sure the ratio is more ultramarine. And just paint that quickly in all over where the water is. If you're using cotton paper, it should be able to handle multiple layers like this. So don't be afraid to start light and work your way darker. The key here is to allow your paper to dry all the way before you do another wet on wet layer over the top. While it's still wet though, you can get away with lots of pulling and pushing of that paint. Paint all the way to the edges. So right now it should look like just this hazy sunset, making the water just glow. If you have a heat tool, this can help speed up the drying process. I always use mine on the lowest setting. Once it's completely dry, we can do an additional layer on the sky. Again, with the intention of working backwards to forwards. So I'm going to take clean water again and go over the whole thing. It's even reactivating some of that dark paint, so it'll soften it all out. If you don't want that in your lighter areas, just lift it back out. Remove any extra water with your brush. And now I'm going to drop in some more blue or dark gray clouds. Again, using ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm going to do one puffy cloud right here in the corner. Need more paint than water. And I'm going to darken up the corner, creating a vignette effect. I want this cloud up here to be really dark, but to get lighter as it comes toward that sunlight in the center. And then I'm going to take a little more burnt sienna, again being careful that I don't have too much water. So I have to blob on my paper towel often. I'm going to reach in the yellow a little bit more, make it a little more orangey around the edges of the cloud. I'm deviating from the reference photo. I'm just kind of having fun with color, using my primaries. When you have a limited palette like this, you may not get perfect color matches, but that's okay. It should be really freeing to only have to think about 3 colors. I'm going to take a little more ultramarine, too dark. If that's the case, just rinse it, remove the extra water, and soften it out. Paint a little cloud over here. All right, so I don't want to go overboard with this, but I do want to balance it out a little more with some blue on this side. It almost looks green, of course, when you paint that over the top of the yellow. So just be careful not to do too much of that on top of the yellow. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's go back into the water and re-wet the water once again. You can even speed up the process by using a spray bottle and taking that directly to your paper and then spreading it out with your brush. Make sure if you're going edge to edge like this that you do bring the water all the way to the edge. And you'll see that even on a block there is a little bit of warping and buckling, but it should dry completely flat. All right, so hopefully your horizon line is dry, but then you have wet paper just below that. That's going to help us with this foggy mountain effect. Working quickly, grab your ultramarine. I would say 60% ultramarine or even 70% and 40% or 30% burnt sienna to create this dark, dark blue gray. More pigment than water. And then we're going to start to paint one of our mountains up here. Notice how it's a hard edge. And then have it come right in front of that sun. Use the tip of your brush to form those mountain peaks. So we're creating that horizon line. Then I'm going to rinse some of that out and then soften it downward. So I'm swiping along the edge, of what I just painted. You can see it's creating this foggy looking edge. Not too much water. Now I've removed most of the paint from my brush and I'm swiping one more time along that edge. Okay, I have a little bit of ultramarine in my brush and that was a little too bright, so I'm going to spread that out. It'll dry lighter, but work quickly and spread it across your paper down into the water. So one more layer of a side-to-side brush stroke for the water. Don't worry too much about these dark edges just yet. We'll go over that with a dark color eventually. Okay, so now let's dry that layer before we move on to the next layer. All right, that's dry now. I'm almost enjoying the way it looks just the way it is, but I'm going to keep going. I want to see what we can achieve with some effects with the water and with these silhouetted mountains along the side. So let's paint one more layer of mountain before we do our darkest silhouette. And we're going to do that the same way. We're going to start by leaving a dry area right here where the tip of the mountain will be, but then creating a wet surface for a soft edge as we go downward. So taking clean water one more time. Now, burnt sienna and ultramarine both lift very easily, so if you're getting frustrated with your paint just kind of lifting right off, be careful that you're just not pressing hard. You're just gently swiping. Okay, so it's nice and wet again. I'm going to take my ultramarine burnt sienna combo. More ultramarine than burnt sienna. And this time I'm going to go ahead and paint a little bit of the silhouette right here. A couple of trees at the top of this mountain. Okay, so this is another one of those mountains that's overlapping. We want it to just fade into this fog as it approaches the water. So you remove a little bit of your paint with your water and then soften it out. Away from that hard edge. You can go a little darker again with a little more paint. And because we pre-wet the paper, we still get that foggy effect. Now, instead of going ahead and drying again, let's start painting some of the water ripples. We're going to stick with that same combo of ultramarine and burnt sienna. Because we only have these three colors, there's naturally going to be so much color harmony here. So now we're going to use a side-to-side brush stroke. Allow your brush to miss little gaps in the paper, but flatten it a little bit more towards the outer edges. So we want the center of our composition to look like it's reflecting that sunlight with some of these white shapes or light shapes from the paper showing through. And make those gaps a little bit wider as you move towards the foreground in the composition. Now I'm going to mix up an almost black using so much pigment. It's going to take a lot of paint. You'll be surprised at how much it takes to make an almost black with this combo of ultramarine and burnt sienna, but there we did it. So now we're going to paint the final silhouette of the mountain right here on the side. You can change it from the reference photo a little bit if you want, or try to make it just like what you see. Paint it in quickly. Tons of paint. You'll be surprised at how much paint you need in order to achieve a really dark with watercolor. And then paint that shadowy reflection underneath. I'm going to need to mix up even more. It always surprises me how much paint I need to go dark. Try not to make it look too streaky. We want it to be a solid mass on the outer edges of the composition. and gently rest your wrist or hand on your table so that you can try to make your streaks nice and straight. Complete each one with a single brush stroke. We'll leave that side alone for a minute, come back to the left side. Once again with your really dark paint. It should be dry enough by now that you can go over this wet area that we wet earlier with a final silhouette. And you can create the effect of little trees coming in front of those previous layers, just with the side of your brush kind of going outward like this. And then once you've got that edge finished, just fill it all in really quickly. And here I am mixing up more paint again. It requires so much to paint really dark. For such a small painting, you wouldn't think you'd have to use that much paint. So while you've got that really dark paint on your brush, try to use it all up on those outer edges of your painting with a strong dark silhouette. Be a little more careful as you create these streaks coming in towards the center. Watch your reference photo for guidance on those. And if you're using cold press paper like I am, you should be able to allow the brush to catch on some of the bumpy texture of the paper, creating the look of glistening water, shimmering highlights. Dip in the water if it is catching too much and isn't creating smooth streaks for you. So here I've dipped in the water so I can smooth out this entire corner and darken it at the same time. And then I want to do the same thing here towards the middle, hopefully without covering up all of my highlights. If you do lose some of your little highlights, you can always go back in with an opaque white paint and replace those or fill them in again. And then I'm noticing I want to do one more little section of mountain here in a mid-tone. So I'm creating one more layer to this mountain back here, using a bumpy movement of the brush to suggest trees. And then I'll make it darker as it approaches the water and leave a shiny streak right where it meets the water. Now I'm not convinced that my horizon line is completely straight here, so I'm going to tilt my board slightly so I can get a better angle on it and try to paint a straight line along the top here. If that area got too dark and you lost some of your foggy effect, rinse your brush out completely, re-wet the area, and then do a little bit of gentle swiping or lifting with your brush. Remove that on the paper towel and go back in again until you're satisfied that it's as light as you want it to be. Restoring that fog. So now you can just touch up the water as needed. Add any other streaks that you want to add. Just going to soften and smooth out some of these marks so they're not so distinct. I want it to look overall like a very soft painting. And I'm actually going to reactivate the paint on this side because it looks a little streaky to me. And just push and pull the paint a little more so that it softens out. And then same with this side. Just dry it a little streaky. Painting dark with watercolor can be really tricky for this reason. It can be tricky to know how much paint you have to use, how many layers. It just takes practice and experience to figure it out. I'm still figuring it out. Every time I sit down to paint, I feel like there's a new discovery, a new problem to solve, something to work out. That's what makes it so exciting. And now I'm just going to darken that horizon line again. One spot that's bothering me a little bit is this little blob right here. So I'm just going to re-wet that and roughly scrub it out. And already I like that better. Okay, I'm going to take just a little bit more of my ultramarine burnt sienna combo, and here at the bottom of the composition paint some specific ripples. Gently lift one more time here at the horizon line where the water meets the mountain. I'm sure there was probably a quicker way to approach this result, but I had to work at it to get here, so sometimes it takes a little longer than I expect it to. So something that was bothering me was that I couldn't get that horizon line to look straight, so I just took a ruler and traced along that edge with a angled brush and gently lifted some of that paint back out so that it looks a little bit straighter. And overall I am happier with the look of that. And this is a good brush to go back in with these ripples and create those nice strong curved lines in the ripples with dark color. Almost black if you can get it, if you can mix it that dark. Remember, you need a lot of pigment to make it dark enough to be almost black with this mix. Overall, I'm really happy with the finished landscape. It is pretty amazing what you can produce with just 3 colors. So I hope you guys will give this one a try. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.